the game is done for. 20 years ago, he had Dr. Dre, 50 Cent, and Eminem backing him. Now, he's burned every bridge, lost millions in lawsuits, and is begging Kendrick Lamar for attention. This falloff needs to be studied because it's straight insanity. Everybody thought they knew the full story about the game. Talented rapper from Compton gets discovered by Dr. Dre, goes 5 times platinum, becomes the next West Coast legend. That was the version everyone repeated for years. But now, the whole narrative is twisting because new details keep surfacing about why literally every mentor, every collaborator, every heavy hitter in hip-hop turned their back on him. From his obsessive stalking of Dr. Dre to his decade-long connection with Diddy, from crash dummy moves during the Drake-Kendrick beef to a sexual assault lawsuit that's costing him everything. Game's story isn't about talent anymore. It's about self-destruction. Let me break this down because the timeline is wild. In 2003, Dr. Dre signed the Game to Aftermath Records. This wasn't just any deal. Dre was treating Game like the chosen one, the heir to the West Coast throne. And honestly, Game had everything lined up for him. Dr. Dre brought in Kanye West, Just Blaze, Timbaland, and even Eminem to work on his debut album, The Documentary. On top of that, 50 Cent and G-Unit co-signed him hard, putting him on multiple singles and giving him mainstream credibility. When the documentary dropped in 2005, it was an instant classic. 5 million units sold, 5 times platinum, #1 on the charts. Game was officially a star. But here's where things get crazy. Within weeks of that success, Game and 50 Cent were at each other's throats. 50 kicked him out of G-Unit claiming Game was disloyal. Game fired back saying 50 was jealous of his shine. And that beef forced Dr. Dre into an impossible position. Pick sides between his new protege and his global superstar. And Dre chose 50. In 2006, Game got dropped from Aftermath Records. That rejection broke something inside him. Instead of moving on, Game became obsessed. His second album, literally titled Doctor's Advocate, every single song mentions Dr. Dre. The title track is a drunk, emotional open letter to Dre where Game is basically begging for validation. Listen to this line. "You was like a father to me. I meant that. Sitting here looking at my platinum plaque thinking, what the fuck am I without a Dr. Dre track? That's not music, that's a therapy session." And Doctor's Advocate still went #1, moving 358,000 copies first week. So Game had proven he could succeed without Dre, but he couldn't let it go. For years, he kept mentioning Dre obsessively in every album, every interview, every song. Fans started noticing the pattern. It was like watching someone who couldn't move on from an ex. One day he'd diss 50 Cent, the next day he'd say he wanted to reunite with G-Unit, then he'd be back to talking about how much Dre meant to him. Nobody could figure out what Game actually stood for. But the real breaking point came in 2022. Dr. Dre performed at the Super Bowl halftime show with Snoop, Eminem, Kendrick Lamar, and Mary J. Blige. Game wasn't invited, and that exclusion sent him into a full-blown meltdown. He started doing interviews, claiming that Dr. Dre barely did anything for him, that Kanye West was way more supportive, that Dre didn't deserve credit for his success. Quote, "Ye did more for me in the last 2 weeks than Dre did for me my whole career." That comment permanently destroyed whatever relationship they had left. Dre stopped talking to him completely. Game admitted it himself in 2024, saying, "I haven't talked to Dre since. It don't really matter if we talk again in life. I said what I said. I'm not going back on it." And honestly, fans could see the bitterness. Game wasn't upset because Dre wronged him. He was upset because Dre chose Kendrick Lamar over him. That jealousy has been eating at him ever since. But here is what things get even darker. Before Game ever signed with Dr. Dre, he was running around with someone else. Someone whose name keeps coming up in the worst possible ways. Diddy. Game himself admitted he spent years partying with Diddy in the early 2000s, even considered signing to Bad Boy Records. In interviews, he casually mentioned how Diddy was flying him out to New York and Atlanta, buying him jewelry, telling him to change, Playboy. And fans are asking the obvious question. What is an unsigned rapper from Compton at Diddy's private parties? Game's old associate Big Face even posted a picture of Diddy hugging Game from behind, with a caption that implied their relationship was way more professional. And now, with all the allegations surrounding Diddy's notorious parties, people are connecting dots. At Game's birthday party in December 2025, he literally said he wanted Diddy and R. Kelly back on the streets. Imagine using your birthday wish for that. That's crazy. But Game's legal troubles go beyond Diddy connections. In 2015, a woman named Priscilla Rainey sued him for sexual assault. Game denied everything, but when it came time to show up to court and defend himself, he just didn't go, and that no-show cost him everything. The judge granted Rainey a default judgment, which means Game forfeited the case. She was awarded $10 million, plus royalties from his albums, plus ownership of his record label. Game is still reportedly $7 million in debt, and the court ordered him to sell his mansion to pay her off, all because he didn't show up to court. That hits different. Now let's get into the motive, because this is where everything starts clicking. The Game's entire career has been defined by one thing: jealousy. Not just envy of other people's success, but a deep, obsessive need to be seen as the best, the most important, the most respected. And when he doesn't get that validation, he crashes out. Think about it. Game went from moving 5 million albums and working with the biggest names in hip-hop to being a punchline. His early success didn't last. He peaked in 2005 and has been chasing that high ever since. Back when the documentary dropped, people say he was pulling in millions from album sales, tours, and endorsements. But now, he's reportedly broke, selling his house to pay off lawsuits, and doing podcast interviews just to stay relevant. Meanwhile, Kendrick Lamar is winning Pulitzers, headlining Super Bowls, and being called the greatest rapper alive. That kind of fall off hits different. And it gets worse for him. Game's relationship with Kendrick goes way back. In the late 2000s, Game brought Kendrick on tour with him, gave him a platform, and publicly co-signed him. At the time, Kendrick was just a hungry kid from Compton trying to make it. Game was already a star. But as the years went on, Kendrick's trajectory kept rising while Game's kept falling. By 2012, Kendrick dropped Good Kid, Mad City and became the new face of the West Coast. By 2015, he dropped To Pimp a Butterfly and became a critical darling. By 2017, he won a Pulitzer Prize. And in 2022, Kendrick performed at the Super Bowl while Game watched from home. That envy has been eating at Game for years, and you can see it in his actions. When Drake and Kendrick were beefing in 2024, Game tried to insert himself into the drama. Drake name-dropped him in a diss track, using Game's blood affiliations to downplay Kendrick's street credibility. And Game, desperate for relevance, took the bait. He dropped a diss track called Freeway's Revenge, targeting Rick Ross, who had sided with Kendrick. The timing was suspicious as hell. It looked like Drake was using Game as a crash dummy to distract from the Kendrick battle, and Game fell for it. What makes this even weirder is that Game and Rick Ross had been friends for over a decade. They collaborated on tracks like Ali Bomaye and Stay Schemin'. So for Game to suddenly turn on Ross after years of working together just to help Drake, that's the kind of snake move that lost him respect in the first place. Fans online were calling him out immediately. They saw through it. Game wasn't staying neutral. He was doing Drake's dirty work. And that desperation for attention confirmed what everyone already knew. Game will do anything, betray anyone just to stay in the conversation. But let's keep it real. Game's jealousy isn't just about Kendrick or Drake or Rick Ross. It's about Dr. Dre. Everything comes back to Dre. Game spent 20 years trying to prove he didn't need Dre, while simultaneously obsessing over him in every album. He built his entire second album around Dre. He mentioned Dre in almost every song he ever recorded. And when Dre finally moved on and chose Kendrick as his next West Coast heir, Game couldn't handle it. That rejection is the root of all this chaos. Game's entire identity was tied to being Dre's protege. When that got taken away, he didn't know how to move forward. So he started lashing out. He dissed 50 Cent, then tried to reconcile. He dissed Eminem, got ignored. He dissed Meek Mill, got ignored. He tried to start beef with Jay-Z, got ignored. Every time Game throws a shot, it's because he's desperate for attention. And the more he gets ignored, the more unhinged he becomes. Put all that together, and it looks like the perfect recipe for a full-blown meltdown. Game went from being one of the most promising rappers of the 2000s to a cautionary tale about what happens when you let jealousy and insecurity destroy your career. And now, in 2026, Game is doing interviews claiming he's the best rapper from Compton, that he could beat Kendrick in a battle, and that he tried to sign Kendrick early in his career. West Coast artists are calling cap. Fans are laughing at him. And Kendrick, he's not even responding. That silence is killing Game more than any diss track ever could. And honestly, that's the most tragic part of this whole story. Game had everything: talent, connections, resources, cosigns from legends. But he threw it all away because he couldn't handle not being the center of attention. Now he's a broke, isolated, bitter version of the star he used to be. And instead of taking accountability, he's still trying to bait Kendrick into a battle just to feel relevant again. That kind of fall off needs to be studied.
But here's the part that really hits different. While Game is out here crashing out, burning bridges, and chasing clout, there are real people getting hurt in the process. Priscilla Waney, the woman who sued him for sexual assault, has been fighting for years just to get the money she's owed. Game didn't just lose the case, he actively avoided showing up to court, which forced her to go through the legal system for nearly a decade just to see justice. That's somebody's daughter, somebody's sister, dealing with trauma and legal battles because Game couldn't take responsibility for his actions. And it's not just her. Think about all the people who believed in Game early on. Dr. Dre invested time, money, and his reputation into building Game's career. 50 Cent gave him features, brought him into G-Unit, and helped make the documentary a success. Kanye West, Just Blaze, Timberland, Eminem, all of them contributed to Game's rise. And how did he repay them? By dissing them, lying about them, and turning on them the second things didn't go his way. Even Kendrick Lamar, who Game claims to respect, got dragged into this mess. Kendrick brought Game on stage during his The Big Steppers tour in 2022, showing him love and respect in front of thousands of fans. And how did Game respond? By doing interviews in 2026, claiming he's better than Kendrick, that he could beat him in a battle, and that he deserves more recognition. That's not respect. That's jealousy disguised as competition. And the saddest part? Game's kids are watching all of this. They're seeing their father lose his house, lose his reputation, and lose his legacy because he can't control his ego. They're reading comments online calling him a clout chaser, a snake, a crash dummy. That's the real tragedy. Game had the talent and the platform to build something lasting, something his kids could be proud of. Instead, he chose chaos, controversy, and short-term attention over long-term respect. And now, at 45 years old, he's more famous for his antics than his actual music. That hits different when you really think about it. What we're seeing here isn't just a rapper falling off. It's a man destroying his own legacy in real time and taking other people down with him in the process. That's what makes this story so dark. Because Game's not just hurting himself, he's hurting everyone who ever believed in him. And he's doing it all for clicks, views, and a few seconds of attention. That's messed up.
Now this whole situation gets even crazier when you realize how Game's clout chasing has escalated over the years. Let's talk about his relationship with 50 Cent, because that beef alone has defined the last 2 decades of his career. After getting kicked out of G-Unit in 2005, Game spent years going back and forth between dissing 50 and trying to reconcile with him. In 2012, he released a diss track called Uncle Otis, where he went at 50 hard. But then, a few months later, he was doing interviews saying he wanted to squash the beef and make a joint album. Fans couldn't keep up with the flip-flopping. 50 Cent, on the other hand, has been consistent. He's clowned Game relentlessly for years, calling him desperate, corny, and irrelevant. And every time Game tries to fire back, 50 just laughs it off and posts memes. That dynamic has made Game look even worse because it shows he's still pressed about something that happened 20 years ago, while 50 has moved on to building business empires. That hits different. But Game's obsession with 50 goes deeper than just music. In 2016, Game tried to reignite the beef by posting a picture of 50's son on Instagram with a caption mocking him. 50 responded by getting a restraining order and publicly embarrassing Game on social media. And instead of letting it go, Game kept posting about 50, kept mentioning him in interviews, kept trying to get a reaction. It was like watching someone who couldn't accept that they lost. And then there's the Eminem situation. In 2018, Game dropped a diss track targeting Eminem out of nowhere. Nobody asked for it. Eminem wasn't even thinking about Game. But Game decided to start beef anyway, claiming he could out-rap Eminem and that he deserved more respect. Eminem's response? Silence. Complete and total silence. He didn't acknowledge Game at all. And that non-response destroyed Game's credibility even more because it showed that Eminem didn't see him as a threat or even worth his time. Game tried to save face by doing interviews saying Eminem was scared to respond, but fans weren't buying it. They saw through the desperation. Starting beef with one of the greatest rappers of all time just to get ignored made Game look like a clown. And that pattern has repeated itself over and over. Game tries to start drama with someone bigger than him, gets ignored, then claims he won by default. It's the same playbook every time. Meanwhile, fans online been working like full-blown investigators, piecing together every contradiction in Game's story. They started pulling up old interviews where Game praised Dr. Dre, then compared them to newer interviews where he trashed Dre. They found footage of Game calling 50 Cent his brother, then calling him his enemy, then calling him his brother again. They documented every time Game flip-flopped on a position, every time he lied about his past, every time he exaggerated his accomplishments. And the evidence is damning. One fan account on Twitter created a timeline showing that Game has contradicted himself over 50 times in the last 10 years alone. 50 times! That's not just inconsistency, that's pathological. Another fan compiled a list of every artist Game has publicly dissed, and it's over 30 names long. Dr. Dre, 50 Cent, Eminem, Jay-Z, Meek Mill, Rick Ross, Tekashi 6ix9ine, Sean Kingston, Stitches, Joe Budden, Charlemagne the God, the list goes on. Game has burned more bridges than any other rapper in hip-hop history. That's not hyperbole, that's facts. And it's not just rappers. Game has also gone after media personalities, bloggers, and even random fans who criticize him. In 2020, he got into a public argument with DJ Academics over a comment Academics made about his album sales. Game went on Instagram Live and spent an hour ranting about Academics, calling him names, threatening him, and accusing him of being a hater. Academics responded by pulling up the actual sales numbers, which proved Game's album had flopped. And once again, Game looked stupid. But here's where things get truly wild. In 2024, during the peak of the Drake vs. Kendrick Lamar beef, Game tried to position himself as a neutral party. He did interviews saying he respected both sides, that he wasn't picking favorites, and that he just wanted to see good music. But then, Drake name-dropped him in a track and Game immediately switched up. He started subtweeting about Kendrick, posting cryptic messages and dropping diss tracks aimed at Rick Ross, who was Team Kendrick. Fans called him out instantly. They saw that Game was being used as a pawn by Drake and he was too desperate for attention to even realize it. The whole situation made Game look like a crash dummy, and that term, crash dummy, has basically become Game's identity at this point. A crash dummy is someone who does reckless, dumb things on behalf of someone else, usually without realizing they're being used. And that's exactly what Game has become. Drake used him to distract from the Kendrick beef. Diddy might have used him back in the early 2000s for who knows what. 50 Cent has used him for content and memes for 2 decades. Game's entire career has become a cautionary tale about what happens when you let others manipulate you for their benefit. And let's keep it real. Everything we're talking about here is speculation until confirmed, but the pattern is undeniable. Game's actions speak louder than any official statement ever could. And right now, those actions are screaming desperation, jealousy, and self-destruction.
Now let's talk about some of the side stories that make this whole situation even messier. Because Game's fall-off isn't just about his beef with Dr. Dre, 50 Cent, and Kendrick, it's about a pattern of self-sabotage that's been consistent for 20 years. And one of the wildest examples of that is his relationship with Sean Kingston. In 2016, Game and Sean Kingston got into a bizarre public feud over, honestly, nobody even remembers what started it, but it escalated quickly. Game posted videos on Instagram mocking Kingston's weight, calling him irrelevant and threatening him. Kingston fired back, calling Game broke and washed up. The whole thing was messy and pointless, and it made both of them look bad. But here's the kicker. A few months later, Game and Kingston were spotted hanging out together, acting like nothing ever happened. Fans were confused. Was the beef real? Was it staged for attention? Nobody knows, but it's another example of Game's chaotic, unpredictable behavior. Then there's the Tekashi 6ix9ine situation. In 2018, before Tekashi went to prison for racketeering, he and Game had a brief friendship. They were seen together at parties, posting pictures on Instagram, acting like they were cool. But after Tekashi snitched on his co-defendants and became one of the most hated figures in hip-hop, Game completely distanced himself. He started doing interviews saying he'd never really liked Tekashi, that their friendship was fake, and that he saw the snitching coming from a mile away. But fans pulled up the receipts. They found old posts where Game was praising Tekashi, calling him a real one, and defending him against critics. Once again, Game got caught lying, and once again, his credibility took another hit. Another wild side story involves Game's short-lived reality TV career. In 2016, he starred in a show called She's Got Game, where women competed for his love. The show was a mess. Game came across as arrogant, narcissistic, and emotionally unavailable, and the woman he chose at the end of the season, he broke up with immediately after filming Wrapped. The whole thing felt like a publicity stunt, and it only reinforced the idea that Game will do anything for attention, even if it makes him look bad. And let's not forget about Game's infamous Instagram antics. For years, he's been known for posting thirst traps, shirtless pictures, and overly sexual content that fans have clowned him for. In 2020, he posted a picture of himself in a towel with a caption that was so over-the-top sexual, it became a meme. People started joking that Game was trying too hard to stay relevant, that he was acting like a teenager instead of a grown man with kids. And instead of laughing it off, Game got defensive and started arguing with fans in the comments. That lack of self-awareness has been a constant theme throughout his career. But probably the most embarrassing side story involves Game's desperate attempts to stay relevant in the streaming era. In 2019, he announced he was retiring from rap. He did a whole farewell tour, gave emotional speeches about leaving the game on his own terms, and thanked his fans for their support. But less than a year later, he announced a new album, and then another album, and then another. Fans realized the retirement was fake, just another attention grab. And every time Game drops new music now, it gets ignored. His last album, Drill-O-Matic: Heart vs. Mind, came out in 2022 and barely made a dent in the charts. Critics trashed it, fans ignored it. And Game responded by blaming the industry, blaming streaming platforms, and blaming everyone except himself. That victim mentality has become exhausting to watch. All of these side stories paint the same picture. Game is a man who can't accept that his time in the spotlight is over. He's clinging to relevance with everything he has, even if it means embarrassing himself, lying to fans, and burning every bridge he's ever built. And the saddest part? He doesn't even realize how bad it looks. He genuinely believes he's still that guy from 2005. But the reality is, hip-hop has moved on without him, and no amount of clout chasing is going to bring him back.
And this story is still unfolding, with way bigger implications than just one rapper's fall-off. What we're seeing here is how unchecked ego and jealousy can destroy a legacy that took years to build. Game's situation is a warning for anybody who gets a taste of fame and thinks it'll last forever, because it won't. And if you don't handle success with humility, you'll end up exactly where Game is right now, broke, bitter, and desperate for attention. The bigger conversation is about responsibility. When you have a platform, when you have millions of fans watching your every move, you have a responsibility to act accordingly. Game had that platform. He had the influence, the resources, the talent, but instead of using it to build something lasting, he used it to start drama, chase clout, and feed his ego. And now he's paying the price. What's even more concerning is how Game's behavior has influenced younger artists. There's a whole generation of rappers who saw Game's antics and thought that's how you stay relevant. Start beef, post controversial content, say outrageous things in interviews, and keep your name in headlines no matter what. But what they didn't see is the long-term cost. Game sacrificed respect for attention. He traded legacy for viral moments. And now, 20 years later, he's a punchline instead of a legend. The music industry has also failed him in some ways. Record labels, media outlets, and even fans enabled his behavior by giving him attention every time he acted out. Every time Game started a new beef, blogs would cover it. Every time he posted something controversial, it would go viral. And that feedback loop made him believe that chaos was the key to success. But it wasn't. It was the key to his downfall. And let's keep it real. Game's not the only rapper dealing with this. We've seen similar patterns with other artists who couldn't transition out of their prime. They cling to past glory, start unnecessary beef, and slowly fade into irrelevance.
But Game's case is extreme because of how blatant it is. He's not even trying to hide the desperation anymore. He's openly begging for attention, and it's painful to watch. The lesson here is simple. Talent alone isn't enough. You need discipline, self-awareness, and the ability to adapt. Game had the talent, but he lacked everything else. And that's why his story is such a cautionary tale. If you let jealousy, ego, and insecurity control your decisions, you'll end up exactly where Game is, alone, broke, and forgotten.
So what's next for the Game? Honestly, it's hard to say. Right now, he's in the middle of promoting a new documentary, an album, doing interviews where he's claiming he's the best rapper from Compton and that he could beat Kendrick Lamar in a battle. But fans aren't buying it. West Coast legends like DJ Quick and Corrupt have already called cap on some of Game's claims, saying he's exaggerating his role in Kendrick's early career. And Kendrick himself? He hasn't responded at all. That silence is the loudest statement he could make. The real question is whether Kendrick will even acknowledge Game, and honestly, he probably won't. Kendrick doesn't need to. He's at the top of the rap game right now. He just dropped one of the biggest diss tracks in hip-hop history with Not Like Us. He's headlining festivals, winning awards, and being called the greatest rapper alive by critics and fans. Why would he waste his time on someone as desperate as Game? But Game is hoping for a response. He needs it, because without Kendrick acknowledging him, Game's relevance will continue to fade. And that's the most tragic part of this whole story. Game has reached a point where being ignored is worse than being dissed. At least a diss track would mean Kendrick sees him as a threat. But silence? Silence means Kendrick doesn't even think Game is worth his time. And for someone as ego-driven as Game, that's the ultimate insult. There's also speculation about what happens if Game keeps pushing. Some fans think Kendrick might eventually drop a quick verse just to shut him up. Others think Kendrick will keep ignoring him and let Game embarrass himself. Either way, Game loses. If Kendrick responds, it'll be a massacre. If Kendrick stays silent, Game will keep looking desperate. There's no win here for him. And then there's the financial situation. Game is still millions of dollars in debt because of the Priscilla Rainey lawsuit. He's been ordered to sell his house, and reports say he's struggling to make payments. So not only is his reputation destroyed, but he's also going broke. That combination is devastating, and it raises the question, is Game about to really be homeless? Is this the final collapse of a once promising career? Only time will tell, but right now, things are looking bleak.
Stay locked in, because this story is about to get even crazier. More details are dropping every week, more interviews are surfacing, and reports say Game is planning to release more diss content aimed at Kendrick. So drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Kendrick should respond to Game or just keep ignoring him? Do you think Game has any chance of reclaiming his legacy, or is he too far gone? And be honest, do you think Game's really about to lose everything, or is this all just another publicity stunt? Make sure you like the video, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single update, because we're covering every twist that comes out. This situation is unfolding in real time, and you don't want to be late to the conversation. Whether you're Team Game or Team Kendrick, whether you think he deserves sympathy or accountability, this is the fall off of the decade, and we're documenting every moment. I appreciate you for rocking with me through this deep dive. Seriously. These long-form breakdowns take time, research, and a lot of energy, so the fact that you're still here means everything. Drop a comment, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and let's keep the conversation going. I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe out there, and remember, talent can get you in the door, but character is what keeps you in the room. Peace.